Hello everyone, it's question and answer time, and I'm really excited about this question and answer session because it's about techniques. And this is from Anne. Hi Mark, my shutter button doesn't work when taking stars at night. I tried using manual, bulb, different ISO. I even tried changing to aperture priority. No tripod, but I did lean against a tree. A shutter button would not move at all. I must be doing something wrong. I walked away frustrated. I hope you can help me out. Okay, Anne, yes I can. Now, when we're dealing with stars, we definitely need a tripod, or you can actually put your camera on a stable surface, such as maybe like a garbage can or a nearby wall, or anything that's stable. And one really interesting trick, if you don't have a tripod and you want to use like a rock or, like I said, a garbage can, if you can put a little sandbag in your car, you can actually use sandbags as really effective stabilizers for your camera. And you can actually hold or position your camera any way that you want, because the sandbag is slightly, it's not malleable, it's slightly, I forget the word for it, but you can transform it. And you can actually aim the camera wherever you want, especially at the stars. Okay, the next thing is, the main question that you have is that your shutter, when you press the shutter button halfway down, you're not getting a focus. And that's totally normal. In fact, all photographers who photograph stars or night or any type of night photography, they always pre-focus. Because your camera, it's almost impossible for a camera to focus on such dark spaces such as a starry night sky. So what you do, it's very simple, is that you just practice in the daytime. Practice focusing on anything that's at a far distance, okay? So for example, maybe there's a tree that's, or a lamppost or something that's far off in the distance. Learn how to focus with that. And then when it gets dark, you will, you either keep that manual focus, or when it's dark, you will do a manual focus on the stars or maybe the moon or some maybe distant street light. And as long as you can see that that light, that pinpoint of light is sharp and not a blur, then you have perfect focus. So let me say that again. It's extremely hard for cameras to autofocus at night. That's why we do what's called a pre-focus, where we manually focus on an object that we feel is at an adequate distance. That means that your stars will be nice and sharp when you do take the picture. Now let me scan your question again. Let me see. There's many different ways to get star trails. Usually photographers will use manual. However, you can certainly try aperture priority. However, what I would suggest is that you maybe, when you're first starting out, try your aperture at the lowest f-stop number and use aperture priority and choose the lowest ISO. Now, of course, there's so many different ways to get photos like this, but why don't you just try that recipe and see what you come up with. And then you can get to the next level, which is full manual, okay? Good. Ed says, Mark, when panning, I always control the shutter directly by using a fixed speed, shutter speed, say 1/30th, rather than controlling it directly by reducing the ISO and aperture. Is there a disadvantage to setting the shutter speed directly? I'm not a fan of tripods, but there is no choice with motion blur. But I want a super light one for travel. Do you use aluminum or carbon fiber? Okay, so I'll get to that question in a second. Now, Ed, when it comes to panning is very tricky, of course, and we're just going to assume that we're going to get this pan without a tripod because it is doable. So I can't really give you a full recipe on the aperture shutter and ISO because the light levels of panning in cities is often very different. But let's just say that you're in a large city that has a lot of lights surrounding it, so that we have, neon lights and so on. And what I want you to do is make sure that you don't have auto ISO. That will not work. Your ISO, ideally, would be set such that, I don't know, you could try 200, ISO 400. However, the main priority in my mind is that you go to shutter priority, which you may already have been doing, and you do experiment with 1/15, 1/8, or 1/8 of a second for the shutter speed, or like you did 1/30 or 1/30 of a second. And essentially, when you're panning to follow that taxi or the bicyclist or the person running down the street, it's very important that you don't rely on your autofocus. Similar to the question that we just had before from Anne, I like to pre-focus because it's often hard for your camera's autofocus to lock on to the subject when it's, fairly dark outside. Now, if you have a professional camera or a prosumer camera that's really good at autofocus, that won't be so much of a problem. However, if you're just using a normal off-the-shelf camera, you may need to pre-focus. Now, when we're panning and following the subject, let's just say a taxi, for example, going down a busy street at night in a city. What we need to do is make sure that we do a test shot, okay? So let's say you're at 1/30 of a second for the shutter speed. You're following your taxi, you take the picture. Now, if you feel that the picture is too dark or too bright, change the ISO, okay? If the picture's too bright, what are we gonna do? Well, the ISO has to change, it has to go down, okay? What if the picture is too dark? Well, we actually have to increase the ISO. Now, I want you to make sure that exposure compensation is set to 0, okay? Now, with exposure compensation set to 0, and you have your shutter speed locked in to, let's say, 1/30, and you have locked in your ISO, I would like you then to take the final test shot, okay? And that final test shot will be, well, okay, it's good, but maybe a little bit brighter, maybe a little bit darker. That's when you can use your exposure compensation. That's the plus and the minus. And with those steps, you should be able to get perfect exposure. And depending on the speed of the vehicle or whatever's passing by, like that taxi, you should be able to get amazing motion blur. One final thing. Let's say that on your final test, you say, well, this is a good picture, but it's way too blurry now, and I can't even see that it's a taxi. Well, if that's the case, we need a faster shutter speed. I'd like you to change it to 1/60. And the reason I can't give you an exact recipe for this exposure situation is because I don't know how bright it is in that location that you're shooting. This is a lot. I hope that I hope that I explained it decently. It's kind of hard technically, but it's worth your time. Definitely getting into issues of advancing yourself on panning. So let me get you your second question about tripods. Yeah, I love the lightweight aspects of carbon fiber, but they're very expensive. If you can afford, if your budget allows for it, get a carbon fiber travel tripod. Okay, thank you, Ed. That was a great question. I hope I didn't confuse things too much. However, because I know you, Ed, you're a good friend of mine, I actually believe that you already have amazing pictures for motion blur. And thank you, Anne. It was a great question, and I hope you do really well with your nighttime star photography. Okay, so the next video is coming up really soon. I have about 3 or 4 more videos, and these questions are coming from people who have submitted their questions through my email list, and that's at markhemmings.com. And if you just go to the free photography lessons, every week or so I give free opportunities for people to learn photography, such as these Q&A sessions. Okay, so check out markhemmings.com, and tomorrow I will release another video because I still have quite a few questions from people who have submitted, and yours are coming up next. Okay, thank you very much. See you soon.